It was just another bright, sunny morning in Malik's neighborhood. The kind of morning that seemed calm and ordinary. The kind of morning you never think could change in a single heartbeat. Malik, a 14-year-old boy with a mop of curly hair and bright, curious eyes, stepped out of his small house, backpack slung over one shoulder, lunchbox in hand, and headphones tucked around his neck. The familiar sounds of the morning surrounded him. The distant hum of a lawnmower, the faint bark of a dog down the street, and the low murmur of neighbors greeting each other as they went about their day. Malik walked with a casual bounce in his step. Today he had a history test, one he had been preparing for all week. His teacher, Mrs. Henderson, was strict but fair, and he had stayed up late quizzing himself over flashcards, hoping he would remember everything from the American Revolution chapter. He imagined himself confidently answering every question, maybe even earning praise from the teacher, a small but satisfying victory that felt worth the early morning stress. As he walked, Malik's mind wandered to the usual teenage thoughts: what he would eat for lunch, the latest video game his friends had been talking about, and whether he would finally muster the courage to ask his classmate, Jasmine, to join him for a science project. He smiled at the thought, not noticing that he had been weaving slightly between the sidewalk cracks, lost in his own world. Malik's father, Commander James Lawson, had already left for work. Being a Navy SEAL commander, he woke up before dawn every day, training relentlessly, then heading off to lead his team in missions that often spanned hours or even days. Despite the intensity of his job, Commander Lawson made it a point to leave Malik a quick note every morning or call to wish him a good day at school. This morning, however, he had just a few minutes to spare, leaving behind only a short note on the kitchen counter. Remember to stay sharp, be confident, and listen. Love, Dad. Malik had smiled at the note, tucking it into his backpack without much thought. Little did he know that the words would feel strangely important in just a few hours. The street was quiet but alive with subtle activity. A neighbor was watering her garden, humming a cheerful tune. Birds chirped from the rooftops, filling the air with an almost musical rhythm. Malik enjoyed these mornings when the world seemed predictable and safe, where nothing out of the ordinary happened, and he could just focus on school friends and small personal victories. He waved to Mr. Jenkins, the elderly man who lived a few houses down, who was taking his morning walk. "Morning, Malik," Mr. Jenkins called out cheerfully. Malik waved back, thinking briefly about how Mr. Jenkins always had stories from back in the day, stories about life that Malik sometimes found boring but secretly loved listening to when he had time. As Malik approached the corner of the block, he noticed a few of his classmates walking in small groups, laughing and joking just like him. He nodded at them, earning a few casual waves and smiles. Everything felt completely normal, as if the day would continue without incident, just like any other day. He adjusted his backpack and took a deep breath, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face. But beneath Malik's ordinary morning, there was something he didn't think about, something he would never know until it came crashing into his world. His father's job, which Malik usually only thought of in abstract terms, dangerous missions, long hours, strict discipline, was a world far removed from the calmness of his neighborhood. For now, it was just another morning, a safe, normal start to the day. He didn't know that this ordinary morning would soon turn extraordinary, teaching him lessons he would never forget. He continued walking toward school, the familiar sights passing by in a comforting blur. The corner store with its colorful displays, the playground that always smelled faintly of rubber and grass, and the row of houses where his friends lived. Everything seemed ordinary, peaceful, predictable. Yet there was a tension in the air that Malik couldn't sense, something invisible but looming, ready to intersect with his life in ways he never expected. Malik hummed a little tune to himself, thinking about finishing his test and telling his father how well he did. He had no idea that the day would not go as planned, that the calm, ordinary morning was only the beginning of something intense and unforgettable. He was just a boy walking to school, unaware that in just a few moments his world would be shaken, and he would need courage in ways he had never imagined. Little did Malik know, the ordinary morning would soon become a story of tension, bravery, and unexpected lessons about life, authority, and family, lessons he would carry with him forever. Malik had barely rounded the corner near the school gates when he sensed something unusual. The morning felt the same, The sun was shining, the birds were singing, but there was a strange heaviness in the air, a subtle tension he couldn't explain. He shook his head, thinking it was just his imagination. After all, mornings were supposed to be ordinary, predictable, calm. But today, calm wouldn't last. Two police officers suddenly appeared near the entrance, standing slightly too close to the sidewalk, their eyes fixed on him. Malik slowed his pace, trying to seem casual, but the officers' sharp, scrutinizing stares made him feel like every movement he made was being judged. His backpack felt heavier on his shoulder, as if it carried not just books, but an invisible pressure he couldn't shake off. "Hey, you there?" One of the officers called out, his voice firm but not overly loud. Malik froze. He wasn't doing anything wrong, or at least nothing anyone could call wrong, but the officer's tone sent a shiver down his spine. Malik nodded hesitantly, unsure whether to step closer or stay put. The other officer moved slightly, cutting off Malik's path. "Where are you headed? Mind if we ask a few questions?" he demanded. Malik swallowed hard. His heart raced, his palms felt clammy, and he realized that every instinct he had learned from his father about staying calm under pressure wasn't enough to make the situation feel safe. I'm going to school," Malik stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. He pointed toward the schoolyard, hoping they would see he was just a student on his way to class. But the officers didn't move. They exchanged glances, their faces unreadable, like they were analyzing every detail of him. The way he walked, the way he held his backpack, the slight nervous twitch in his hands. Malik felt the stares of nearby students, some whispering, some wide-eyed, watching the unfolding tension. It was a strange mix of curiosity and fear, and Malik wished more than anything that he could just disappear into the crowd. But there was nowhere to hide. The officer's presence felt overwhelming, like a wall closing in. He tried to explain again, "I'm just going to school. I didn't do anything wrong." But the officers ignored his words, their questions sharp and probing, their tone growing slightly more impatient. Malik's stomach churned. He thought about running, but his father had always taught him never to escalate a situation with authority, to stay calm and respectful no matter what. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Every second stretched painfully, each one heavier than the last. What had started as a normal morning had turned into something strange, intimidating and frightening. Malik felt small, unsure and trapped, but deep inside a flicker of determination, something he inherited from his father, refused to let panic take over. He knew he had to handle this carefully, even though he didn't know how. Unbeknownst to Malik, the morning he thought would be ordinary was already beginning to spiral into a story that no one in his neighborhood would forget, and the moment when his father would arrive, changing everything, was closer than anyone could imagine. Malik's heart pounded harder as the seconds dragged on, each one stretching longer than the last. What had started as a strange encounter had begun to feel like something much bigger, a test of patience, composure, and courage he hadn't prepared for. The officers, still standing in his path, exchanged subtle glances, whispering just loud enough for Malik to catch fragments of their conversation. Their voices were clipped, sharp, and tinged with suspicion. He had no idea what they were thinking, but he could feel it in the air. They didn't trust him, and every innocent movement he made seemed to confirm their doubts. Malik's mind raced. He tried to explain again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just going to school. I didn't do anything wrong." But the words seemed to vanish into the tense air, ignored by the officers as if he hadn't spoken at all. One of them stepped closer, his boots scraping the pavement in a deliberate way that made Malik flinch. The other officer shifted his stance, his arms crossed, body language rigid and authoritative. Malik felt trapped, like a small bird caught in the glare of two predators. Nearby students had begun to notice the tension. Some stopped walking, eyes wide, whispering to each other. Others pulled out their phones, instinctively filming the scene, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. Malik could hear snippets of their murmurs, words like, "Why are they being so rough?" and "Is he in trouble?" But no one moved closer. He realized that in that moment he was alone. Everyone around him was a spectator, not a participant. He took a careful step back, trying not to provoke the officers. But in doing so, one of them reached out slightly, placing a hand near the strap of Malik's backpack. Malik froze. Panic surged through him, a mix of fear and instinctive defiance. "Please, sir, I'm just a student. I am not causing any problems," he said, his voice trembling slightly despite his effort to remain calm. The officer's face hardened, and his eyes narrowed. "Why are you acting so nervous?" "You've been walking around this area a lot lately," he said, his tone accusatory. Malik shook his head, confused. I live nearby. I walk to school every day." But the explanation seemed to fall flat, dismissed as just another excuse. Every word, every movement, seemed to escalate the situation further. Malik could feel his chest tightening, his thoughts racing. Should he run? Should he argue? Should he try to call his father? But he remembered his dad's lessons. Don't escalate, stay calm, stay respectful. He took a deep, steadying breath, forcing himself to remain composed even as the officer's suspicion grew. Suddenly, one of the officers noticed Malik's watch, a subtle gift from his father engraved with a simple message. "Stay strong." The officer's brow furrowed, but he didn't comment. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, continuing to question Malik, his words sharp and probing. Malik could feel sweat forming at his temples, a bead of fear running down the side of his face. Every instinct told him that this was more than just a simple misunderstanding, and that someone, needed to intervene before it spiraled further. And then came the whispers from the crowd. A few students had edged closer, murmuring among themselves, tension evident in their faces. Some were worried. Others were angry. Malik felt the weight of their eyes on him, the weight of expectation and judgment pressing down. He wanted to explain, to defend himself, but his words felt trapped inside, powerless against the looming authority in front of him. Little did Malik know, while he struggled to stay composed and innocent under the intense scrutiny of the officers, a figure had noticed the unfolding scene from down the street, a figure whose arrival would change everything. His father, Commander James Lawson, had been alerted by the school about an incident involving his son. Trained to react calmly in even the most dangerous situations, he had already begun moving toward the scene, calculating his approach, assessing the risk, and preparing for what he might face. For Malik, though, none of that mattered yet. All he could feel was the pressure building, the fear gnawing at his stomach, and the creeping realization that this ordinary morning was no longer ordinary. Every instinct screamed that things were about to escalate further, that the next moments could be crucial, and that the ordinary walk to school had turned into a challenge far beyond anything he had imagined. The officers, unaware of who Malik really was or the legacy behind him, continued their interrogation. Malik's mind raced, trying to balance fear with reason, courage with caution. He took a step back, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of calm surrender, hoping that reason would prevail. But deep down he knew that something extraordinary was about to happen, that this moment, tense, frightening, and uncertain, would soon change the course of his day, and maybe his life forever. Far across town, Commander James Lawson's morning had begun like any other. He was already 2 hours into his rigorous training routine, push-ups, pull-ups, drills, and mental exercises that pushed him to the edge of exhaustion. Every movement, every breath was precise, honed over years of service in the Navy SEALs. Discipline was second nature to him, but despite the structure of his morning, something felt off. It started with a call from the school. "Commander Lawson, there's an incident involving your son," the voice on the other end said, calm but serious. The word struck him instantly, not in shock, but in a way that sent a surge of instinct through his body. Years of high-stakes missions had taught him to assess situations quickly, to trust instincts, and to act decisively. There was no time to overthink. His mind immediately began calculating the possibilities. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, his voice steady, authoritative, yet calm. The details were limited, but enough to make his pulse quicken. Malik was being questioned by the police near the school. Nothing had escalated to violence yet, but the tension was palpable, and his training told him that it could. Commander Lawson didn't hesitate. He knew he had to get there immediately, but not recklessly. He grabbed his gear and moved with deliberate precision, his mind running through scenarios as he went. What kind of officers were they? How aggressive? Was Malik hurt? Was this a misunderstanding or something more serious? Each possibility shaped his approach. But above all, one thing remained clear. He would not allow his son to be intimidated, mishandled, or made to feel powerless. As he drove toward the school, his calm exterior masked the surge of adrenaline inside. Years of handling life-or-death situations had trained him to control fear, to channel it into clarity, and to make decisions under pressure. Now that same training focused entirely on one goal: ensuring Malik's safety without escalating the situation. Commander Lawson's mind also raced with thoughts of Malik's upbringing. He had instilled in his son the principles of respect, courage, and calm under pressure. Malik had learned about self-discipline, about keeping cool even when the odds seemed stacked against him. And yet James knew this was different. Real authority, real intimidation wasn't something a teenager could navigate alone. His fatherly instincts told him that the situation needed a steady hand, a controlled presence that could command respect and resolve the tension instantly. By the time he arrived at the school, he could already see the crowd forming. Students whispered to each other, phones raised to capture the scene. Malik stood frozen, tense, and cornered by the two officers who had no idea who he was. Commander Lawson stepped out of his vehicle, every movement deliberate, every step exuding authority. His presence alone seemed to alter the atmosphere. The officers didn't know it yet, but this was not just apparent. This was a man trained to stay calm in situations where life itself was at stake. A man whose authority demanded respect by sheer presence. Commander Lawson approached slowly, keeping his hands visible, his voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen," he said, projecting confidence and control. "I'm Commander Lawson. This is my son." At that moment, Malik felt an unspoken relief flood over him. His father's arrival brought not just protection, but reassurance. The tension in his body eased slightly, replaced by awe at the calm and commanding presence standing beside him. For a teenager who had been cornered and intimidated, the sight of his father, someone who embodied composure, discipline, and authority, was grounding, almost surreal. Commander Lawson's eyes scanned the situation, quickly assessing the officers' demeanor. He noted their posture, tone, and gestures, understanding immediately that they had acted out of suspicion rather than malice. But that didn't matter. His focus was on de-escalation, ensuring Malik's safety, and maintaining respect for authority while making clear that his son was under his protection. With measured steps, he positioned himself slightly ahead of Malik, a subtle shield without intimidation, projecting calm authority. "My son has done nothing wrong," he said evenly, his voice steady but carrying the weight of command. The officers paused, recognizing the tone, the certainty, and the authority behind his words. Something in the way he spoke, a combination of confidence, discipline, and undeniable presence, changed the dynamics immediately. Malik watched silently, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and awe. He realized in that moment that his father's skills weren't just for high-stakes missions or dangerous operations. They were here, in this very ordinary schoolyard, transforming an intimidating encounter into a controlled, resolvable situation. It was a father's instinct, honed over years of extraordinary experience, meeting an ordinary but fragile moment of childhood vulnerability. Commander Lawson's arrival didn't just promise safety. It promised clarity, control, and a lesson in courage that Malik would carry forever. The air around the schoolyard seemed to thicken the moment Commander Lawson stepped fully into the scene. The two officers had been focused entirely on Malik, their suspicion palpable, their posture rigid, their tone sharp. But now everything shifted. There was a subtle pause in their movements, a sudden awareness that the situation was no longer one-sided. Commander Lawson approached deliberately, each step measured, his presence commanding attention without aggression. The students nearby instinctively took a step back, sensing the gravity of the moment. Malik, standing frozen, felt his heart rate begin to slow, though the adrenaline still coursed through his veins. His father's calm authority radiated a strange sort of power, one that demanded respect not through fear but through the undeniable presence of experience and confidence. "Gentlemen," Commander Lawson said evenly, his voice calm but layered with authority, "I am Commander James Lawson, Navy SEAL. This is my son." The words landed like a thunderclap in the tension-filled air. The officers blinked, surprised, their eyes widening ever so slightly as they registered who they were dealing with. There was no hostility in his voice, but the weight behind his words made it clear that any escalation would not be tolerated. It wasn't a threat. It was an assurance that this situation would be handled decisively if necessary. One officer cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the interaction. "Sir, we were just..." Commander Lawson held up a single hand, cutting him off without a hint of anger. "I understand your duty," he said calmly, "but my son has done nothing wrong. I'm here to ensure this misunderstanding is resolved quickly and safely." For Malik, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Just minutes ago, he had felt trapped, cornered, and small, intimidated by authority figures who seemed unyielding. Now, with his father standing between him and potential conflict, he felt a surge of relief mixed with awe. The man who had taught him discipline, courage, and self-control was now applying those lessons in real time, protecting him without needing to raise his voice or make threats. The officers exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. They could feel the authority in Commander Lawson's demeanor, an unspoken understanding that he was not someone to be tested. Every instinct they had trained in law enforcement told them that escalating further would be unwise. The tension, once thick and suffocating, began to loosen just slightly. Commander Lawson took a measured step closer to Malik, a subtle, protective motion, signaling both reassurance to his son and control of the space. "Malik," he said softly, "everything is going to be okay. Stay calm." Malik nodded, swallowing hard, his voice lost in the lump of relief and fear in his throat. He felt small but protected, a strange, comforting combination. The officers shifted their stance, now more aware of the man in front of them than the boy they had been questioning. We were just trying to make sure everything was okay," one officer admitted, his tone now more cautious. Commander Lawson nodded once, acknowledging their intent while subtly reminding them of the need for professionalism. "I understand," he said, "but this is not a situation that required intimidation. You can verify my son's story with the school. Let's resolve this calmly." There was a long, silent moment. The tension that had gripped the air like a heavy fog slowly began to dissipate, replaced by an almost surreal calm. Malik felt it in his chest, a wave of relief that made his knees feel lighter. He looked up at his father, and for the first time that morning, he truly understood the depth of his father's training, not just in combat but in control, in authority, and in the ability to de-escalate situations without conflict. The officers nodded, murmuring their apologies and taking a step back. Commander Lawson kept his eyes on them, steady and unwavering, ensuring the lesson was clear. Respect, composure, and professionalism mattered above all. There was no humiliation, no shouting, only the quiet authority that comes from experience, confidence, and moral clarity. Malik felt a mix of emotions, pride, relief, and a lingering awe at his father's calm in the face of tension. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a lesson in courage, discipline, and the quiet power of presence. He realized that bravery wasn't always about action in the moment. It was about control, confidence, and knowing how to act decisively when it mattered most. By the time the officers finally stepped aside, the atmosphere had completely changed. What had begun as a frightening encounter had transformed into a resolved misunderstanding, thanks to the quiet, unwavering authority of a father who knew exactly when and how to act. Malik's ordinary morning had become extraordinary, and he would carry the memory of this confrontation and the lessons it taught forever. The tension in the air slowly began to lift as the officers finally stepped aside. The crowd of students who had been holding their collective breath began to murmur quietly among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering words of admiration. Malik stood frozen for a moment, still processing the whirlwind that had consumed his morning. His knees felt weak, his heart still racing, but the protective presence of his father beside him gave him an undeniable sense of safety. Commander Lawson placed a steadying hand on Malik's shoulder, a subtle gesture of reassurance. "It's over now," he said quietly, his tone calm but firm. Malik exhaled, feeling the tight coil of fear inside him loosen slightly. The officers approached, this time with a different energy, not the sharp, intimidating presence from minutes ago, but cautious, respectful, and aware that they had been confronted by someone whose authority and composure could not be challenged. "We apologize for the misunderstanding," one of the officers said, his voice lower, tinged with sincerity. "We didn't know." The words trailed off, but the intent was clear. They recognized that the boy in front of them was not the problem. It had been a situation blown out of proportion by assumptions and fear. Commander Lawson nodded, accepting the apology but using the moment as a teaching opportunity for both Malik and the observing crowd. "This is a lesson for everyone," he said, his voice carrying an even weight, authoritative yet instructive. "Sometimes situations appear threatening when they aren't, and sometimes authority figures make mistakes. But what matters is how we handle those mistakes with calm, respect, and awareness." Malik listened closely, absorbing each word. He had felt powerless just moments ago, trapped between intimidation and confusion, but now he realized that courage wasn't just about standing up physically. It was about staying composed, thinking clearly, and trusting the right people to act when necessary. For Malik, his father's actions were more than protective. They were a masterclass in dignity and control. Around them, the students began to gather closer, their curiosity mixing with awe. Some whispered about how lucky Malik had been, while others reflected on how quickly ordinary moments could escalate. A few brave students approached, quietly asking Malik if he was okay. He nodded, finally finding his voice, and managed a small smile, still shaken but relieved. Commander Lawson crouched slightly to meet his son's eyes. "Remember this day, Malik," he said softly. "It's not about fear. It's about awareness, responsibility, and understanding how to face challenges with clarity. You handled yourself well, but sometimes it's not just you. You need to recognize when it's time to let someone else step in." Malik nodded, feeling the weight of the lesson sink in. It wasn't just about avoiding danger. It was about learning how to navigate a world where not everything is fair or predictable. As the officers moved away, the school staff approached, offering quiet thanks to Commander Lawson for his calm handling of the situation. They reassured Malik that everything would be documented properly, and the misunderstanding would be cleared. The tension of the morning began to fade completely, leaving behind a mixture of relief, respect, and reflection. Malik's friends slowly gathered around him, their questions hesitant but filled with curiosity. "What happened? Were you in trouble?" one asked. Malik looked at them, still processing, and then glanced at his father. Commander Lawson gave him a small nod as if to say, "You'll understand in time." Malik realized that this morning, which had begun as a simple walk to school, had transformed into a life lesson he would never forget. Walking toward the school entrance, Malik and his father moved together side by side. The ordinary morning had turned extraordinary, leaving a lasting impression on both of them. Malik felt pride, relief, and a newfound understanding of courage. Commander Lawson, meanwhile, reflected quietly on the responsibility of his role, not just as a Navy SEAL, but as a father guiding a young boy through a world that could be unpredictable and sometimes unjust. By the time they reached the school gates, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The students were whispering among themselves. The officers had resumed their duties with a more careful approach, and Malik felt a sense of clarity settle in him. Today had been frightening, yes, but it had also been a lesson in resilience, authority, and the quiet strength of family. For Malik, the ordinary morning had ended, but the lessons it carried would stay with him forever. Courage isn't always loud. Power isn't always visible, and sometimes the greatest protection comes not from force but from the calm, unwavering presence of someone who knows exactly how to act. By mid-morning, the story of what had happened in front of the school had already begun to spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. What started as a tense and frightening encounter between Malik and the two officers had grown into a topic of discussion that no one could ignore. Parents, teachers, and students alike were talking about the incident, analyzing every detail and reflecting on the lessons it carried. In the schoolyard, students gathered in small clusters, whispering fervently. Some expressed admiration for Malik's composure, noting how he had stayed calm even when faced with intimidation. Others marveled at the sudden arrival of his father and the way he had handled the situation with authority and restraint. Phones were out, videos and messages being shared in rapid succession. The ordinary school morning had become, in a matter of minutes, a lesson in courage and the unexpected ways heroes reveal themselves. Word of the incident quickly reached the parents waiting nearby. Mothers and fathers exchanged worried glances as they discussed what had happened, some shaking their heads in disbelief at how quickly a routine morning could escalate. "It's unbelievable," one parent murmured to another. "Just a walk to school. And yet it became this whole ordeal." Others spoke about the bravery of Malik's father, Commander Lawson, noting that it was rare to see such calm authority in action outside of high-stakes situations. Teachers who had witnessed the aftermath approached Malik, offering quiet words of reassurance and encouragement. "You handled that well," said Mrs. Henderson, her tone both warm and reflective. "It's not easy staying calm under pressure, but you showed a lot of courage today." Malik nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and relief, knowing that he had been watched and supported not only by his father but by his community. Even the officers involved appeared visibly changed by the experience. Their earlier stern expressions had softened, replaced by a cautious respect. It was clear that they had recognized the gravity of the misunderstanding and the effectiveness of calm authority. A few of them spoke quietly among themselves, reflecting on the lesson they had just experienced firsthand, that authority and intimidation are not the same, and that a composed, confident presence can de-escalate tension more effectively than force. The neighborhood, too, began to absorb the story in its own way. Parents at nearby houses who had witnessed part of the incident recounted it to friends and family, emphasizing not just the confrontation, but the powerful example set by Commander Lawson. Conversations about fairness, respect, and accountability sprang up everywhere, from street corners to local coffee shops. People debated what had gone wrong, why assumptions had been made, and how easily fear and misunderstanding could escalate. For Malik, the community's reaction brought a strange sense of perspective. What had felt terrifying moments earlier now felt like a shared experience, a reminder that lessons about courage, respect, and vigilance were not learned alone. He realized that while the morning had been frightening, it had also become an opportunity for everyone around him to witness and reflect on the importance of understanding, patience, and authority used responsibly. By the end of the day, the school had regained its usual rhythm, but the echoes of the incident lingered. Teachers, students, and parents carried the story with them, discussing it in hushed tones, reflecting on their own assumptions, and recognizing the invisible struggles that young people sometimes face. Malik walked home with his father side by side, feeling a profound sense of connection, not only to his family but to the broader community that had silently observed, learned, and reflected. It was a rare day when a simple morning walk could ripple outward to touch so many lives, to spark conversations about courage, accountability, and the power of presence. Malik understood in a way that went beyond mere words that his father's actions had not only protected him, but had also taught an entire neighborhood about restraint, respect, and the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed in everyday life. Even later that evening, as conversations continued online and among neighbors, Malik and his father shared a quiet moment of reflection. The neighborhood's reaction had confirmed something James had always believed. Courage, discipline, and composure were lessons that extended beyond family. They could influence and inspire an entire community. And in that realization, Malik began to see that his ordinary morning, transformed by extraordinary circumstances, had already become a story that would resonate far beyond the schoolyard. The events of that morning had left an indelible mark, not just on Malik, but on everyone who had witnessed or heard about the incident. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the neighborhood, Malik walked beside his father, Commander James Lawson, feeling a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and something deeper, understanding. It was one thing to read about courage, respect, and authority in books. It was another to live it, to feel it pulsating through a moment when fear and tension threatened to overwhelm. Malik's thoughts wandered as he replayed the confrontation over and over in his mind. He remembered the tightening of his chest as the officers had approached, the way his hands had trembled slightly despite his best efforts to stay composed, and the overwhelming sense of vulnerability he had felt when he realized he was alone. Yet, he also remembered the calm, deliberate presence of his father, the steady gaze, the measured steps, and the quiet authority that had instantly shifted the energy around them. Malik realized that courage wasn't about fighting or shouting. It was about clarity, control, and knowing when to step in or step back. Commander Lawson broke the silence gently. "Malik," he said, "today wasn't just about what happened with those officers. It was about understanding the world you live in, how people can misjudge, how fear can escalate situations, and how your actions, even small ones, matter." Malik listened intently, nodding, feeling the weight of his father's words. He knew that he had learned a lesson no textbook or classroom could ever teach. The neighborhood, too, had absorbed its own lessons. Parents had spoken to their children about respect, awareness, and accountability. Teachers had reflected on how quickly misunderstandings could arise and the importance of addressing them thoughtfully. Even the officers involved had left with a new perspective, humbled by the calm but commanding intervention of someone who knew exactly how to balance authority with restraint. The ripple effect of a single tense encounter had touched more lives than anyone could have anticipated. For Malik, the most important lesson was about responsibility and presence. He realized that even as a young teenager he could navigate challenges with calmness and respect, but that sometimes it was okay, necessary even, to rely on the guidance and protection of those with experience. Courage was not about acting alone. It was about knowing how to act wisely and when to accept help. Commander Lawson glanced down at his son, his expression a mixture of pride and reassurance. "Remember this day," he said softly, "not as a day of fear, but as a day of growth. You've seen how discipline, training, and calm authority can change outcomes. That's the kind of power you'll carry with you all your life. Quiet, steady, and always guided by integrity." Malik absorbed the words, feeling a quiet strength take root inside him, a realization that life would throw unexpected challenges, but that how he responded could define not just the moment, but the person he would become. As they approached their home, Malik noticed the subtle reactions of neighbors, some nodding in respect, others smiling quietly. He realized that the morning's events had created more than a personal lesson. They had sparked conversations about fairness, accountability, and courage in the broader community. Ordinary days, he understood now, could carry extraordinary lessons if one paid attention. That evening, Malik sat at the dinner table with his father, reflecting on the events while savoring the calm after the storm. He understood that life was unpredictable, that fear could appear in the most ordinary situations, but that clarity, preparation, and presence of mind could turn potential chaos into growth. The confrontation that had seemed terrifying in the moment was now a cornerstone of his understanding. About courage, about respect, and about the invisible strength people carry. In the quiet of that evening, Malik realized that this day would stay with him forever. The ordinary morning had transformed into an extraordinary experience, one that taught lessons far beyond textbooks, the value of calm authority, the power of experience, the strength of family, and the impact a single person's presence could have on an entire situation. It was a story of courage not in violence but in poise, not in shouting, but in measured, purposeful action. Malik knew deep in his heart that he would carry these lessons forward. One day when he faced challenges of his own, big or small, he would remember this morning. The fear, the tension, the unwavering calm of his father, and the way the world could shift in a moment when courage and clarity guided every decision. And in that understanding, he felt a quiet pride and a deep sense of readiness for whatever life might bring next.